This is Mr. Eugene, and today we're talking about something that makes people deeply uncomfortable. Men in their 50s and 60s living alone. Not because they couldn't find someone, not because they failed at relationships, but because they walked away. And here's the part that disturbs people most. They're not miserable, they're not desperate to get back into relationships, they're not lonely, they're relieved. You see them everywhere once you know what to look for. The man who lives in a small, clean apartment, works his job, goes to the gym, has a few hobbies, maybe sees friends occasionally, lives quietly. And when people ask why he's not dating, why he's not trying to find someone, he gives vague answers that don't satisfy because the real answer would sound too honest. The real answer is, I tried that for decades, and the day I stepped out of it was the day I got my life back. Society tells us these men are missing something, that they're incomplete, that they chose loneliness over love, that they're too damaged or too difficult or too selfish to maintain a relationship. But watch one of these men closely. Watch how he lives. Watch the peace in his daily routine. Watch how he doesn't check his phone anxiously. Watch how his weekends belong to him. Watch how his money stays in his account. Watch how his decisions are his own. And then ask yourself honestly, does that look like a man who's missing something, or does that look like a man who finally found something he'd lost for years? Stay with me. This goes deeper than most people want to admit. The slow compression, how relationships reshape men, let me walk through what actually happened to these men before they walked away, because they didn't start as solitary. They started as men who wanted partnership, who believed in relationships, who tried. Phase 1, the adjustments begin. He meets someone. There's attraction, connection, hope. He thinks this could be something real, so he does what men do. He adjusts, he compromises, he accommodates. Small things at first. She doesn't like his friends, so he sees them less. She wants him home more, so he cuts back on hobbies. She prefers he dress differently, so he changes his style. She wants more communication, so he texts more, calls more, checks in constantly. Each adjustment seems reasonable in isolation. Each compromise appears small, but they accumulate, and over months, over years, he becomes a smaller version of himself, not dramatically, not visibly, but gradually, consistently, he shrinks to fit the shape she's comfortable with. He doesn't notice it happening because it happens slowly, like water wearing down stone. Each drop is nothing, but after years, the stone is reshaped completely. Phase 2, the emotional labor trap. Somewhere along the way, he becomes responsible for her emotional state, not just his own, hers too. If she's upset, it's his job to fix it. If she's anxious, it's his job to calm her. If she's unhappy, it's his job to make her happy. If she's stressed, it's his job to reduce that stress. He becomes mood manager, problem fixer, emotional regulator, not just occasionally, daily, constantly. His mental energy is perpetually redirected to managing her internal weather. And what does he receive in return? Little support, little reciprocity. When he's stressed, the expectation is that he handles it. When he's upset, he's being difficult. When he needs emotional support, he's being needy. The emotional labor flows one direction, from him to her, always. This creates exhaustion that most people don't recognize as exhaustion because it's not physical. It's cognitive. It's the constant mental load of monitoring someone else's emotions, anticipating their reactions, managing their responses. Over years, this drains him in ways he can't fully articulate. He just knows he's tired. All the time. Tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. Phase 3, life reassignment. His time stops being his own. His schedule gets built around her needs, her preferences, her comfort. His hobbies disappear because they take time away from her, or she doesn't understand them, or she doesn't like them. His friends fade because she doesn't like them, or doesn't trust them, or creates enough friction that seeing them becomes more trouble than it's worth. His decisions become negotiations. Where he eats, what he watches, how he spends money, when he works, what he does on weekends. Nothing is simply his choice anymore. Everything requires her approval, her input, her agreement. His life becomes built around her comfort. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he stops living his life and starts managing hers. Not because she's evil, not because she's deliberately controlling, but because the relationship dynamic requires constant accommodation from him and constant consideration of her. And over time, the man who entered the relationship with his own identity, his own interests, his own life, becomes the man whose entire existence revolves around maintaining her happiness and avoiding her displeasure. The moment everything changes, there's a moment these men describe. Not all of them can pinpoint it exactly, But they remember when something shifted. For some, it's after a divorce. For others, it's after a relationship ends. For some, it's a conscious choice to step back from dating entirely. But the moment is the same, the day when his mind stops revolving around her, the Tuesday morning realization. He wakes up on a Tuesday morning. Nothing special about the day. He makes coffee, sits in silence, and realizes something. His thoughts are his own again. He's not thinking about what she needs, not worried about her mood, not planning how to avoid conflict, not managing her emotions, not monitoring his words, not walking on eggshells. His mind is quiet. For the first time in years, maybe decades, his mental space belongs to him. And the feeling isn't sadness, it's not loneliness, it's relief, pure, complete, overwhelming relief. The weight he didn't fully realize he was carrying is gone. The constant low-level stress that became his baseline has disappeared. The cognitive load of managing another person's internal state has lifted, and he can breathe. This moment is what changes everything, because once a man experiences this relief, once he feels what it's like to have his mind and his life and his time belong fully to himself again, he cannot go back. You cannot convince a man who's tasted peace to return to chaos. You cannot shame him back into the stress he escaped. You cannot guilt him into rebuilding the cage he finally broke out of. He knows what both lives feel like now, and he's chosen. What they gained by leaving. Let me be specific about what these men's lives actually look like, because the picture society paints is loneliness and failure. The reality is completely different. His time is his. He wakes up when he wants, spends his weekend how he chooses, pursues hobbies without justification, sees friends without negotiation, makes plans without approval, changes plans without explanation. His time belongs to him completely, and for a man who spent years with his schedule controlled, his activities questioned, his choices requiring permission, this freedom is extraordinary. His money is his. This is where it gets really clear. The money doesn't disappear anymore. It doesn't get redirected to things he doesn't want. It doesn't fund social obligations he doesn't care about. It doesn't maintain a lifestyle built around her preferences. It stays. It accumulates. It becomes available. He doesn't realize how expensive a relationship was until he's no longer funding it. Not just the obvious expenses, the hidden ones, the constant small purchases, the maintaining of appearances, the keeping up with her expectations. The money that used to vanish monthly now sits in his account, and he looks at it and thinks, where was this going? What was I funding? His mind is quiet. No more walking on eggshells, no more monitoring her mood, no more anticipating reactions, no more managing emotions, no more avoiding topics, no more careful wording. He can think clearly. His mental energy isn't constantly redirected to relationship management. His cognitive resources are available for things that actually matter to him. The chronic pressure is gone, and the absence of that pressure feels like waking up from a bad dream. His life is light. He comes home to silence, not lonely silence, peaceful silence. No tension waiting for him, no problems to solve, no mood to manage, no conflict to avoid. His home is his refuge, not his battlefield, and that difference is everything. He does what he wants in the evening, reads, works out, watches what he wants, learns something new, or does nothing, just sits in peace. And peace, after years without it, feels better than any relationship ever did. The financial reality nobody discusses. Let me break down the actual numbers, because when you see it clearly, you understand why these men never go back. During the relationship, shared expenses that weren't actually shared equally. Her preferences dominated. Nicer apartment than he needed, furniture he didn't care about, decorations that mattered to her, vacations to places she wanted, restaurants she chose, social activities she valued, gifts, holidays, birthdays, anniversaries, her family's expectations, her friends' events, maintaining the relationship through financial expression. His hobbies got cut because they cost money that could go elsewhere. His interests got deprioritized because they weren't shared. His financial goals got delayed because current spending took priority. He's making decent money, but it's always tight, always going somewhere, never accumulating the way it should. After leaving, same income, suddenly there's money, a lot of money, saved monthly, available for investment, building toward goals that matter to him. He's not spending more on himself. He's spending less overall because he's not funding someone else's lifestyle and preferences and social obligations. The money that was redirected for years is now visible, and it's substantial, thousands monthly, tens of thousands yearly, over a decade, hundreds of thousands. He looks at this and realizes that's what it cost. That's the price of the relationship. And he's not angry, he's just aware. And the awareness makes going back impossible because now he knows exactly what he'd be trading his money for, and it's not worth it. The rejection reframe. Here's something these men often think about: the women who rejected them earlier in life, the relationships that didn't work out, the women who chose someone else. Society frames rejection as loss, as missing out, as failure. But these men, living in peace now, they see it differently. Every rejection was protection. Every failed relationship prevented a long-term burden. Every woman who chose someone else saved him from years of what he eventually had to escape anyway. What they thought they missed might have been what saved them. Some men weren't overlooked, they were spared. Not every closed door is rejection, some are protection, some are life steering you away from something that would have drained you for decades. The woman who rejected him at 25 and married someone else, he sees her now at 45, sees what her husband's life looks like, sees the stress, the weight, the constant management, and he thinks, I dodged that. The relationship that ended badly in his 30s, he realizes now that relationship ending was the best thing that happened to him, even though it hurt then, even though he wanted it to work, because working would have meant staying, and staying would have meant more years of what he's now escaped. This reframe is powerful. It transforms every past failure into current protection, every loss into a gain he didn't recognize at the time. Why society hates this? The men living this way face constant social pressure, judgment, questioning, attempts to convince them they're wrong. Why? Because their existence threatens the entire narrative, the narrative society needs. Society needs men to believe that relationships, marriage, partnership, these are the path to fulfillment, that being alone is failure, that solitude is loneliness, that men need women to be complete. This narrative serves important functions. It maintains social structures. It pressures men into relationships that benefit others more than them. It keeps men working, providing, accommodating. But men who've left and are living peacefully, they're proof the narrative is false. They're evidence that the life society warns against is actually better than the life society promotes. And that's threatening, because if more men realize this, if more men choose peace over partnership, the entire system is challenged, the shaming language. So society deploys shame. These men are commitment phobic, emotionally unavailable, too damaged, too difficult, too selfish, Peter Pan syndrome, refusing to grow up, running from responsibility. All language designed to make their choice seem like failure, like immaturity, like something wrong with them. But watch these men's lives. They're not irresponsible. They work, they take care of themselves, they contribute to society, they just don't contribute to relationships that drain them. They're not emotionally unavailable, they're available to people who don't weaponize emotional labor against them, they're available to friendships that don't cost their peace. They're not damaged, they're recovered from relationships that damage them. The shaming language doesn't work on them because they've lived both lives. They know which one is better, and no amount of social pressure changes that knowledge why others are bothered. The people most bothered by these men's choices are often people stuck in exactly what these men escaped. Men trapped in difficult marriages, women who need men to stay in relationships that serve them, people who invested heavily in the narrative and can't admit it might be wrong. These people need the solitary men to be miserable, because if they're not miserable, if they're actually happy, if they're living better than the people in relationships, then what does that say about the choices the stuck people made? It says they might be wrong, and people don't want to be wrong about fundamental life choices, so they attack the evidence that suggests they are. The life society warns against. Let me paint the picture society uses to scare men away from solitude. The warning: you'll end up alone, old and alone, no one to care for you, no family, no companionship, lonely holidays, empty home, dying alone. This is the threat. This is what they warn will happen if you don't maintain relationships, don't compromise, don't accommodate. The reality: these men aren't lonely, they're peaceful, they're not isolated, they have friends, hobbies, community involvement, they're not empty, they're full of things that matter to them without the weight of managing someone else. Holidays aren't sad, they're calm. No family drama, no forced gatherings, no maintaining appearances, just peace. Their homes aren't empty, they're sanctuaries, places of rest rather than tension, places they want to be rather than places they escape from. Dying alone, everyone dies alone, even married men. Being married doesn't change the fundamental solitude of death, but it might mean you spend your last decades managing someone else's needs instead of living in peace. The life they warn you about is the life these men refuse to give up, because they've learned something most people won't admit. Being alone isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. Being drained by someone you're supposed to love is worse. Being slowly erased is worse. Losing yourself inside a relationship is worse. Loneliness is temporary discomfort. Relationships that consume you are permanent damage. Why they never go back? Here's what people don't understand. These men aren't avoiding relationships because they're scared. They're avoiding relationships because they know exactly what they cost. They've lived it. They've experienced the slow compression, the emotional labor trap, the life reassignment, the financial drain, the loss of self, and they've experienced the relief of escaping it. You cannot convince someone who's escaped to walk back into the cage. You cannot shame someone who's found peace into choosing chaos again. You cannot guilt someone who's recovered into voluntarily becoming damaged again. They know what both lives feel like, intimately, completely, and they've chosen. Not because they hate women, not because they're broken, but because they value peace more than they value partnership. And that's a completely rational choice. Relief versus romance. Society sells romance, connection, companionship, love, all the emotional highs of relationships. But these men remember the daily reality, the management, the accommodation, the walking on eggshells, the constant pressure, the cognitive load, the financial drain, the loss of freedom. And they choose relief over romance, peace over passion, freedom over partnership. Because relief is sustainable, romance isn't. Relief gets better over time. Romance fades and reveals the structure underneath, and the structure is labor, constant, exhausting, unrewarding labor. They'd rather have quiet Tuesday mornings that belong to them than exciting Friday nights that cost their peace. Final thoughts. The biggest lie society tells isn't that men end up alone. It's that being alone is worse than what they left. These men didn't lose something when they walked away. They gained something. Their time, their money, their mental space, their peace, their life. What looked like companionship often came with a cost nobody talks about. The cost of becoming smaller, the cost of emotional labor that flows one direction, the cost of life reassignment, the cost of funding someone else's preferences while abandoning your own. Not all women, not all relationships, but enough. Enough that men who've experienced it recognize each other, recognize the relief, recognize the freedom, recognize the peace, and they protect it fiercely because they know what they escaped and they know they're never going back. You weren't missing love, you were missing yourself, and finding yourself again feels better than any relationship ever did. Drop a comment if you recognize this. Men, have you experienced the relief, the weightlifting, the life becoming yours again? Subscribe, because this channel will continue examining the truths about male experience that society wants to keep hidden.